Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Whether it's spring planting, fall harvesting, or just a drive across the state, soy biodiesel helps a diesel-powered engine operate in a demanding job. Soybean oil from Nebraska soybeans makes biodiesel a renewable fuel that's also environmentally responsible. The soybean checkoff plays a major role in supporting the use and availability of biodiesel. The Nebraska Soybean Board, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Mike Briggs gives us his thoughts on the cattle markets. Keith Jarvi discusses the arrival of soybean aphids. Tamra Jackson-Ziems talks about the prevalence of Goss, wilt in corn. And Alex Wach shows how soybeans are helping elementary educators teach science to their students. Mike Briggs is our marketing analyst this week. The latest USDA cattle report came out in February. The mid-year cattle report, scheduled for release this month, was canceled due to USDA budget cuts, which means detailed numbers for the current state of the industry after a multi-year drought are difficult to predict. We know from February's report that the inventory for cattle and calves was the lowest since 1952. The stock of cows and heifers was the smallest since 1941. The current UNL drought monitor classifies nearly 98% of Nebraska in some form of drought. Last year at this time, all the state was in some form of drought, but it wasn't as severe. Recent estimates from the USDA show U.S. farmers will plant the most corn acres in 77 years. If realized, that should lower input prices for cattle feeders. The Livestock Marketing Information Center is forecasting a 33% drop in corn prices for the 2013-2014 crop marketing year to $4.60 per bushel. But with U.S. corn progress behind normal, the actual fall harvest can come none too soon for the feeder. Friday's Cattle on Feed report, released after this taping, will shed light on marketings and placings in a feedlot sector that's now battling to fill pens.
This is the smallest number of cattle we've had probably since the 80s. The cattle market's really tough. It's hard to want to place any cattle because you're still buying huge losses. Customers don't want any part of it, and we don't want any part of it either. We've lost enough money.
Yeah, those losses have been there for a while now. Is it just that nobody has the stomach or the bank to stay in there any longer?
I think it's some of both. People are just primarily most of our customer base is farmer feeders. And the farmer's making so much money on this $7 and $8 corn, he doesn't want to give it back on these cattle. And it's been going on for about 18 months now. And the losses are pretty staggering, and people are just tired of it.
Do you feel that's widespread not only across Nebraska?
Absolutely, it's widespread. And not just Nebraska. No, you're seeing yards in Texas close. You're seeing cattle migrate this way because this is where the feed is. But even that, we still have $7.50 corn, and that makes it really difficult when this week we might trade $15, $16 cattle and cost of gains are $1.25, $30.
Can you see any way to be optimistic once harvest rolls around and think I might try to get in now so I'm there when or if it turns?
Great question. I know that I'm trying to buy smaller cattle so that I will have cattle here to have the cheaper corn in the fall. But you know, it's getting a little dry in Western Corn Belt. So the big struggle with the corn market lately has been, well, will the Eastern Corn Belt make up for what the Western Corn Belt's going to lose? Well, I have no idea. I just know it doesn't look that good here, and that's not good because we need a big corn crop.
Did you find any help in the acre numbers or in the recent supply and demand estimates? Anything there?
There's nothing really there for me. I'm more concerned about what we're going to have. It's going to be tough from here till harvest to have corn. You know, corn's $2 over right now. Who knows how far it could go if corn gets really seriously tight between now and harvest. The other things we have to worry about is how far behind this crop is, and you're going to have to worry about frost, and now it's getting hot and we have pollination, and There are so many things mixed into that corn crop. To count that thing as good is really hard for me at this point.
Right, that was one of the things we talked about a year ago, how it was an early harvest, and now with delayed planting, you're going from not only 12 months, but almost to 13, and possibly in some cases 14 months.
Absolutely, and that's going to put more stress on the whole situation.
Any help from consumers here this summer? We saw the delay in grilling season that really didn't come until maybe June, but
right.
Now as you get to the hotter part of summer, where is it?
Well, I think we have a real problem there because typically after the 4th of July, beef demand just does a header. And I don't see any difference this year because it's hot, beef is high, gas is getting higher, and so that pinches the consumer. And when it's hot, nobody wants a big protein-laden meal, and so I think that's a real concern. And beef is pretty high in the supermarket already. So I think from a demand standpoint, we have a problem, plus we have a little problem on the supply end of it, and I think we'll see that again in this week's Cattle on Feed. We've got a lot of big cattle up front that we have to go through in a time period where demand is not very good. So I'm afraid the market's going to struggle here for a little bit.
For a little bit? Does that mean that it's not going to after a little bit?
I don't think it gets very good till December. I think you're going to have to get through all these big cattle, get calves placed in feed yards so you don't have a big supply of fat cattle. You're going to have to get those gone. You're going to have smaller cattle come into the feed yard to actually get to where there's a tightness in numbers, because right now this tightness in numbers that we've been hearing about for a year never happens because we keep placing big cattle and just have upfront supplies consistently, and I don't see us getting out of that till November, December.
Where do you envision a year from now for the cattle industry based off of 2 years of drought?
That's a great question. I'm completely lost right now. It amazes me. There's a lot of feed yards my size and smaller that are really, really down on numbers, and you have big feed yards that are really full. I know the packers own a lot of cattle right now, and they're going to have to, because until it becomes profitable, those of us out here in the free enterprise market aren't going to do it. So it's really interesting to me, and the calf crop's going to be small. There's going to be a structural change in this industry. I think there's going to be a lot of fallout from this, and there's going to be some feed yards go away.
Not only feed yards, but what about in the pasture? What about the rancher who's trying to find pasture?
Yeah, that, until Mother Nature decides to take better care of those guys, I don't know what's going to happen there. That's bad, because I know a lot of these guys grazed off their meadows this year because that's all they had for grass. Now that means they won't have any hay. That thing's tough, and the only thing that solves that is Mother Nature and rain, a lot of it.
Next week, North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson will join us to look at wheat harvest updates and current market movement. Nebraska's Farm Service Agency has authorized emergency haying and grazing on CRP acres in 54 Nebraska counties due to drought. The consent was valid July 16th. Nebraska FSA Director Dan Steinkruger said farmers and ranchers used 300,000 acres of emergency CRP in 2012. There are restrictions this year, though. There will be a 25% reduction in the annual rental payments, and no haying or grazing will be allowed on land for rare and declining habitat. Participants aren't allowed to sell the hay, but if you aren't a livestock producer, you can rent or lease the privileges to an eligible livestock producer. You must request approval before haying or grazing. Producers are asked to contact their local FSA office for more information. We'll also link to the list of authorized counties on the Market Journal website. The state's soybean crop has fared well so far this season. 70% of Nebraska's beans are rated good or excellent, and 39% have bloomed, which is only 1% behind the 5-year average. But for farmers in certain areas of the state, July brings the threat of damage from soybean aphids. The pests can be hard to spot at the size of 1/16 of an inch, and they generate quickly. In 2011, UNL researchers in Dickson County monitored a field that had almost no aphids on July 22nd, but by August 18th, they noticed the presence of over 2,000 per plant. Keith Jarvi joined us earlier this week to talk about scouting, treating, and what growers might be able to expect this year.
Well, right now the numbers are pretty low here in northeast Nebraska, which is where we usually first detect them. Right now we're just seeing a few, and hopefully they'll stay that way, but we know that they can reproduce pretty quickly, so we're going to keep a close eye on them.
Remembering back to last year when it was so dry and warm, what were the kind of numbers that you saw then?
Pretty low last year. We were in the mid-90s, upper 90s, and those kind of temperatures really suppress aphid numbers. So we're closer to normal this year, so we have probably a little bit better chance of seeing aphids increase here in the next few weeks.
So as you advise producers to go out into the field and scout, what are some tips or recommendations that they can use?
Well, aphids aren't as hard to scout as some people think. They'll generally begin on the upper part of the plant, but they will be on the underside of the leaves. So they're fairly small, probably less than a 1/16 of an inch, but usually you'll see 5 to 10 on a colony pretty easily. But you do have to turn that leaf over on the top part of the plant to first detect them. After that, once they start to reproduce in heavier numbers, they can go anywhere on the plant.
What's the threshold for treatment? I mean, because you're looking at such a high number for treatment that do you recommend counting every single one or kind of grouping it all together?
Well, it doesn't take long to learn how to do it. I tend to, when I scout, I tend to look and see how, what does 10 aphids in a group or 20 aphids in a group look like. And when you do that, you can estimate a population on a plant pretty quickly. So I would say look for groups of 10 and 20 and just make an estimate from that.
So as soybeans start to enter their reproductive stage, what's the threshold that you recommend treatment at?
Well, our basic recommendation, if you have 250 aphids per plant and 80% of the plants have at least some aphids on it, and those populations are increasing, that's when you might want to think about treating.
How long do you need to keep scouting for throughout the season?
Well, we've had damaging populations go all the way up through stage R5, so that can go all the way till the mid to the end of August. So, now's the time to stay ahead of it. If they reach that threshold, fine, but the weather can change pretty quickly, and those populations can still increase all the way up through R5. So I definitely want to keep an eye on them until you hit full seed.
Now, there are some natural enemies to the aphid. What are those, and what do they look like, and how can they help?
Well, the easiest natural enemy to spot is that the Asian lady beetle, which is a very large ladybug or ladybird beetle. We also have lacewings, smaller flower bugs. So there's a lot of predators out there. Some of them are pretty small, but the easiest one to see, of course, is the lady beetle.
If you would have to treat, and you're going to do it early in the season, is there any danger that they could come back and make economically damaging levels of damage towards the end of the season?
Generally in Nebraska, we get a later infestation, and we're not like Minnesota and Wisconsin and Iowa where they might be treating already and possibly have a second buildup. Normally, when we treat in early to late August, that usually is good enough, and we rarely see a buildup. Now, if we have guys treating, with a kind of a insurance type application in mid-July, that takes out natural enemies, and potentially we can have a flare up there, but normally one treatment is enough to control soybean aphids in soybean.
And finally, if you do make the decision to spray, is the recommendation to spray alone, or are you okay with mixing it with something else in the tank, that is?
Well, it's as long as, if you think you might get a benefit, potentially I would say with a fungicide, you can try that. We don't necessarily like mixing herbicides and insecticides because the nozzles and the gallonage and that might be a little bit different. What you want to do with control soybean aphids is high gallons, high pressure, and that would probably work well with a fungicide, not necessarily with a combination with a herbicide.
As far as benefits from fungicide applications, next week we'll show you an interview from the World Soybean Research Conference in South Africa on the potential benefits and drawbacks of those kinds of applications. For more help in scouting aphids, you can download the Aphid Speed Scout app developed by UNL and free to use on tablets and smartphones through the Apple Store and Google Play Store. The prices for regular gasoline and on-highway diesel fuel not only rose in every section of the country last week, all regions are also above the point they were at a year ago. The national gasoline average of $3.64 per gallon is 21 cents higher than last year and 15 cents higher than last week, while the average diesel fuel price of $3.87 a gallon is 17 cents higher than at this point in 2012. In its short-term energy outlook released this month, the U.S.'s Energy Information Administration says it expects the annual average price of regular gasoline to fall to $3.48 per gallon in 2013 and slip farther to $3.37 a gallon in 2014. The first discovery of Goss's bacterial wilt and leaf blight occurred near Lexington in 1969. Findings in several Midwestern states followed. The overwintering pathogen gains opportunity especially when leaves are damaged from hail or high winds. We talked with Tamra Jackson-Ziems this week to look at recommendations for scouting and treating and how prevalent the disease is throughout the state.
Well, we're seeing Goss's wilt statewide across Nebraska from east to west, mainly in the southern counties, but it is worse this year in that we are seeing more systemic wilt, Goss's wilt, and especially in that southwest part of the state.
In the fields you're finding it, is it widespread within those fields?
In those fields, it's typically in the susceptible corn, popcorn and other susceptible hybrids, and so it's spotty. It's not in all fields, of course, just spotty in areas.
So how's the recommendation differ than depending on if you have a high-risk field?
Well, in particular, I want people to get out and scout and know whether or not they've got it. And if they're going to scout those fields that are high risk, the ones with continuous corn who may be in minimum till, and especially if they've had a history of Goss's wilt or a hail event or high wind, or some other wounding event in the past.
What are they looking for once they get into the field?
Well, in particular, I want to make sure people are looking for a couple of diagnostic characteristics. So Goss's wilt produces freckles, and those are going to be on the edges of lesions, and you may find that they're dark green or black freckles. And there's no other pathogen that we know of that produces that symptom. Well, in addition, as the bacteria reproduce, they're pushed out onto the surface of the lesion and can give it a glossy or shiny, glossy appearance.
You had mentioned last year when we talked that you were noticing some systemic wilt as well, and that wasn't necessarily common in eastern Nebraska. What are you seeing this year?
Well, this year we're seeing even more of the systemic wilt, and that's bad news, because I want people to know that even a good resistant hybrid is not resistant against the systemic wilt. And so these hybrids that become wounded early on by V4 or V5, those are the ones that could develop systemic disease and die before they ever have an ear.
And to notice that damage, you're just breaking open a stalk to look at it?
Yeah, that's one way. Or they may notice that plants are in generally wilting down and may have some lesions on the leaves. And when they do cut open the stalk, they may see evidence of decay and movement.
Is there anything you would recommend producers do now?
Well, at this point, there's not a lot that they can do if they have already found Goss's wilt. Some people have chosen to try bactericides that can be labeled for corn. Those products will not behave like the systemic fungicides that they may be used to. Most of the products that are bactericides are contact or preventive product and do a better job before infection takes place.
But it's probably best just to look for something next season?
Absolutely, and they can plan for next season, and using resistant hybrids and crop rotation, they can do a much better job of preventing the disease in the future.
As far as gray leaf spot, as we switch topics here, anything to keep in mind as you start to look for that?
Yeah, we're starting to see a little bit of gray leaf spot, and mainly in our very susceptible inbreds in our seed corn fields, and maybe in a few very sensitive hybrids out there. And so what I'd recommend is people looking for gray leaf spot, scouting the fields where they would expect it in higher risk fields like continuous corn and where they've had a history, and looking on those lower leaves, because that's where you're going to see gray leaf spots start first, as those rectangular gray lesions.
And what can you do about it?
Well, we do have some very effective foliar fungicides, and so those products are more effective as you move forward and think about trying to prevent lesion development on the ear leaf from getting up that high on the plant, because that's when it'll begin to affect our yield the most.
If you think you've found Goss's wilt in your field, you can send a sample to the Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic here at UNL for confirmation. Next week, Curtis Harms will show how that lab uses samples to correctly identify potential problems. Nebraska's 2 U.S. senators didn't mince words in their criticism of the Environmental Protection Agency and its use of aerial surveillance to look in on livestock operations. In the July Nebraska Farmer, Senators Mike Johans and Deb Fisher say the EPA provided information on many of those operations to environmental and animal rights groups. The 2 Republicans say the information the EPA released was littered with private material, including names, home addresses, and personal telephone numbers. You can read the rest of their opinion piece in July's Nebraska Farmer. In 2012, Nebraska farmers harvested nearly 5 million acres of soybeans. Those beans are used to feed livestock, they're ingredients in household products, and now educators are using soybean production as well as Nebraska agriculture to teach science to their students. Market Journal's Alex Wach has more.
Soybeans are important crops to Nebraska's economy and to our global food supply, and now they are even being used as teaching tools. The Summer Science Soybean Institute recently gathered teachers from Lincoln, Northeast Nebraska, in Kansas from June 24th through July 12th to discuss ways to learn about agriculture and food. The program was designed to show elementary teachers how to better incorporate relevant science into their classrooms by using the soybean as a model. Coordinated by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, the Summer Science Soybean Institute has been growing rapidly, according to Tiffany Hang-Moss, Project Coordinator and Associate Dean for the College of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at UNL.
So we started the soybean project 4 years ago, and one of the reasons why we got excited about it was we had the opportunity to partner with the College of Education and Human Sciences, my colleague Dr. John Peterson, and we decided that we wanted to provide teachers with an opportunity to actually be scientists, focus on research, and we wanted to do it within the context of something that was important to the state of Nebraska. And so my research was working on soybeans and a pest of soybeans being the soybean aphid, and so it just seemed like a logical model for us to pursue.
The teachers attending the institute worked with program leaders to adopt the soybean system as part of their classroom curriculum. Betsy Sanders, 4th grade teacher at Huesner Elementary School in Kansas, says the incorporation of agriculture into curriculum sparked her interest in the program.
And coming from Kansas and Midwest, it's all agriculture, and a lot of their kids are farm kids, and so it's something that could hook them and really get them interested. And science in the curriculum, a lot of the stuff that we're doing right now is reading and math, and so trying to find a way to integrate that science is really big. So being able to find something that gets them interested and is really hands-on was a big appeal for me to go to it and see it.
All of the educators in the program met on UNL's East Campus from July 1st through the 3rd to participate in experiments and to see the models that could be used in their own classrooms. Kevin Atterberg is an 8th grade teacher at Kohler Middle School in Lincoln and was named Teacher of the Year by the Nebraska Farm Bureau. He says these workshops also help the teachers learn about agriculture.
Things we're teaching here in the Institute are from animal sciences, so finding out why a cow, how a cow's digestive system works, to the staging of soybeans, so you're able to use the soybeans in your classroom to figure out how long they grow and the different from seedlings and everything. Another thing, we just got finished up with a termite lesson to show that insects have certain abilities and have certain things that restrict them in the insect world.
Soybeans can be used to demonstrate many aspects of science, including weather and soil conditions. These real-life applications and hands-on learning techniques will be used by many of the teachers who attended the Institute, including Corey Deaver, a science teacher at Weskin High School in Kansas.
The main thing that I'm going to take back is using inquiry as a way to teach my students, because I have a variety of students that I'm going to have from 7th all the way up to 12th grade, and putting the power back in their hands and having them ask the questions. That's the way I can reach every single one of my students instead of using a variety of learning strategies.
I think it's really important that our youth understand the importance of agriculture, and they understand about how agriculture impacts their daily lives. And soybean is a wonderful system to talk about how it connects to all different aspects of us through our daily lives, and also how it impacts our state economy and the national economy.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Alex Wach.
The Summer Soybean Science Institute is jointly funded by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the United Soybean Board. Now with this week's weather forecast, here's UNL Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. We are desperately in need of some widespread rainfall across the state, particularly as we enter the critical corn pollination period for this year's crop. Now, we have seen over this last week some scattered activity across western Nebraska. Some of these air masses have pushed some of that air toward the west, but more importantly, a lot of locations in south central, southeast, and portions of southwest Nebraska have went for the better part of 3 to upwards of 4 weeks without any what we would call significant moisture, greater than a half an inch. And in fact, most areas for the month of July have not received any moisture, so there is that concern, of course, with this drying conditions. This weekend does represent one of the best opportunities we've had in a long time for some moisture that could be fairly widespread, particularly over the eastern half of the state. If you're in western Nebraska, unfortunately, this forecast may not be the one that you want to hear. Let's take a look at the upper air models and see how this is going to play out as we go through this next 7-day period. As we go to the upper air models, one thing I'll draw your attention to is we have this upper air trough, and to the west we have this high pressure system sitting over the southwestern United States. And so systems that are going to be moving in a northwesterly to southeasterly direction, and the main core of energy will remain to the north of Nebraska, but we should be close enough to this energy that at least the northeastern half of the state would have some decent chances of thunderstorm activity today. And if we believe the models, it would indicate anywhere from a 1/2 inch to upwards of 1.5 inches in isolated thunderstorms of precipitation, but those precipitation totals drop off rather dramatically as you move toward the southwest. Now as we go into tomorrow, we'll see that front sags a little bit farther to the south, so there will be that chance for scattered thunderstorm activity, and some of that may actually build back towards southwestern Nebraska, although the models are not indicating a great deal of precipitation with this event. At least there will be some precipitation around. As we get into Monday, we'll see that another piece of wave energy is expected to move through the upper plains, and that probably will clip northeastern Nebraska and possibly east central Nebraska, but it'll leave much of southwestern Nebraska high and dry. And as we go into the day on Tuesday, now this trough starts to lift, and we start to build that heat back into our region to some extent. And if the models are correct, we could be looking at close to triple-digit heat once again in the southwest corner of the state. By the time we get to Wednesday, we start to see this high really start to bubble up, and of course northeastern Nebraska will remain on the cool side with a chance of scattered thunderstorm activity, and the pattern remains pretty persistent on Thursday, not much movement, and as we get into the day on Friday, we'll see the same thing. So there's that isolated chances of thunderstorms. So let's take a look at the temperature forecast, and you'll see that we're consistently in the 90s across southwestern Nebraska, upper 80s across northeastern Nebraska, and those temperatures could go up a degree or two if that high pressure system itself builds in. Now as we go from next Thursday through the following Tuesday, we'll see that the western part of the United States is going to be under the influence of that high pressure, so above normal temperatures in terms of precipitation. It looks like dry through the central and south central plains regions.
Thanks, Al. Our interviews from today with Mike Briggs, Keith Jarvi, Tamra Jackson-Ziems, as well as Alex Wach's story on how soybeans are helping elementary educators teach science to youth are available individually online and through the Market Journal mobile app as part of the July 19th episode of Market Journal. Next week, Frayne Olson will be our marketing analyst. Curtis Harms will show you how UNL's Plant and Pest Diagnostic Clinic uses samples to identify diseases, and we'll look at the possible benefits and drawbacks of foliar fungicide applications in soybeans. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
No matter how you look at it, animal agriculture helps Nebraska's economy. The livestock industry provides increased tax revenues for schools and community services. Livestock enterprises also create jobs while contributing to existing businesses such as local banks and grocery stores. A thriving livestock industry helps maintain our current way of life, but also provides opportunities for the next generation of farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff helps to raise awareness of the importance of animal agriculture to Nebraska.